Hey guys, so welcome back. I am not sure when I'm gonna release this. I probably am gonna release it today, which is the 15th. But next week I start my classes, so I probably won't be releasing a video until um, late into the weekend, probably Sunday, or we might just be on a little hiatus. I do want to try and do at least one a week. And of course, that'll vary depending on the classes I have, the books we read, and whatever. But anyway, so uh, obviously, we're going to do Station 11. We're going to talk about that. I'm just going to do a quick recap of everything. First is I actually had that. That was a Christmas gift from a coworker. I love it. It's awesome. It actually has a little Pokemon in it, and of course, it has my favorite Pokemon, which is Bulbasaur. And I just figured it'd be just a nice little thing in the background. If not, we can turn it off and whatever. It'll still sit back there because I still like it and I still like having it on. But yeah. I also got the bookshelf done. It's all organized. It's all taken care of. There is a method to the madness. So uh, if that becomes a question, we can also discuss that. How did I figure all that out? Um, and then the tea that I'm drinking, of course, I love this mug. I've had it for years. Um, but it's actually chamomile tea. I cheated a little bit. I actually put Haagen-Dazs into it. So yeah. I put vanilla Haagen-Dazs, so it's not as if I did anything like magical or mystical. But I was just like, I just wanted a little pizzazz for today. I don't know. So we'll go ahead and sit that down. Um, Other little housekeeping things. Um, I think the next video I'm going to do, which I might record sometime. Currently, it's like going on 10 p.m. So I don't know. So in that video, I'll probably have just as a backup for next week. And that'll just be going over the books from last semester. Like I said, I wanted to kind of set that up that we're, as I go and do classes and stuff like that, I want to kind of like communicate that, like kind of like, especially as like a senior, like recapping my entire college career. Anything else? Anything else? One final thing. The last video I had, one of the things I talked about was the Christmas cards, because I am strange. Currently, I have 14 left. When I made the last video, I don't remember if I said how many I had left. I had a lot. So I probably had in the area of like 60, maybe something like that. So I'm happy with that over the past like 5, 6 days. Um, I also laugh. I'm wearing a shirt that I got for Christmas. Um, and I took out the tag, and I was a genius. And yeah. So note to self: do not rip tags. Do not rip tags. So, yeah. So that's everything. So we'll go ahead and get into the conversation. So, I actually, uh, we'll actually just grab this. So I just threw it right here. Um, so this is Station 11, which is by Emily St. John Mandel, which I read a couple years ago. And I was actually lucky enough. I didn't find any articles that we had read. That's one of the things that I usually will do. If it's a book that I read for a class, I'll try to find some of the articles. But I actually had to write 3 papers, like 3 short papers or like 3 pages. And so I was able to get like a nice summary, kind of like some of the stuff I was thinking about. So yeah, so one of the things I definitely wanted to talk about in Station 11, which is uh, it's a it kind of flows between, it's a apocalyptic, uh, pre-apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic, a lot post-apocalyptic, because I can't say that word. Uh, um, and we follow several characters. I skimmed through much of the book, looked at a lot of the notes that I made, and I was just like, this would be a good book on character versus good depiction for character versus whoever. Um, we have one of the main characters who's Elizabeth, who's struggling with. I guess that what I should say is that there's three timelines, which is the pre, the during, and then post apocalyptic time periods. Elizabeth, I believe, is, yeah. There's like several characters, but she is post, and she does a very good depiction of life after. She is working with within this symphony that they're traveling around. I believe they're in Michigan. I believe that's where I can remember. Um, and so what is happening is that there was a horrible pandemic that swept through the globe. It um, wiped out a huge percent of the population. And I don't remember off the top of my head what the name of the pandemic was. I didn't write that down. Um, so we have her, um, who's really that what I focused on whenever I was really thinking about the book. But there's other characters, and some of the scenes during the pandemic is what stuck with me both when I was originally reading it and now. Um, and one, of the scenes is of a character who has the disease in Singapore or Vietnam, and it's just, you know, and it reminds me of the Spanish death or the Spanish plague that just swept through and people died, within a week. And that's pretty much how this novel was set up. And so this female character um, literally knows she's going to die, and it's just as the sun is coming up. So we have this description of her, literally dying, and the last thing that she says, is literally watching the sun come up, and then she dies. Um, so there's this character versus nature kind of situation where literally there's this pandemic that is, just wiping people out. And it does a very good indication about what it would look like in that situation where a pathogen or something um, just wipes out an entire population, the entire world. And there's no real means to stop it. Um, Fortunately, in the current pandemic, we are lucky enough that as this pandemic has happened, we are able to survive, or enough of us have survived. I believe in the book, it is a total loss of everything. And there's, I think it says that there's about 99.5% of the population had died or is expected to have died. And so there's that. And so we kind of see, this, pre and, during, the apocalypse, how society is trying to survive and how people are trying to communicate and stuff like that. Now, as it continues, um, we end up really meeting two characters named Elizabeth and Clark. I did name Elizabeth a little bit. Clark, you know, very much is situated, you know, as well in in the symphony. And of course, it's like anything else. People are doing their best to survive. Now, um, there does become a point where, like in anything else, where people get abducted and stuff like that. And in here, I believe, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, and I can't, where I wish I could remember. And I believe it's Clark that gets kidnapped. It's not Elizabeth. I do remember that. Um, but a couple of them, a couple people get kidnapped from the symphony, and they're pretty much held as hostage. And, there's this craziness of character versus character. So what does that tell us? We have this understanding of character versus nature, character versus character. But then there's also character versus self, um, which we see a bit, with Elizabeth. One of the few memories that Elizabeth actually has, that it sticks with me, is that from the pandemic is one of the gifts that she gets. She gets a magazine article, or an actual like magazine. And so now, one of the things that they do as a symphony is that as they travel, they go and obviously they see towns and villages, all kinds of stuff that are completely deserted. Everybody's gone, you know. So what they have to do is that they rummage through these houses. They check, they try to see if there's anything that they could use, and especially for something like a symphony or whatever, they look for, are there instruments? Are there things like, stuff that they could take? And for Elizabeth, one of the things that she usually will take, she'll look for specific magazines, and stuff like that. That's one of the things how she holds on to it. And there's, this grappling of how do you survive? How do you yourself, oh, there we go again. um, let me turn that off. How do you come to terms when you're in a situation like that? How do you grapple with that? And that's definitely touched on in the novel is, things that people do, and, that allow for them to survive, what keeps them going. And of course, like free, um, everything else, there's this backboard explanation about why people do the things that they do. And it all comes down to, this need for understanding, this need for survival. And especially in a situation where all of life falls apart, we come to understand that, and it's a lot easier to see in a novel, like this, that for somebody like Elizabeth, how do you have control when, as a child, you watched everything fall apart? You watched literally the world crumble. And so her big way is that, she watches, she'll collect things. And there's a similar thing. For example, people that have had their house completely burned to the ground, like from top to bottom, through the basement, another foot through. And for example, in that situation, so many of these people end up becoming hoarders or similar to hoarders, you know, in this need that they have to have things that they, if they let something go, it'll be lost, something like that. And this is very similar, especially to how Elizabeth acts, that she needs to hold on. She has to hold on to something. And there are many characters that are like that. And there's one of the worst scenes I remember that really depicts character versus self um, is there's also uh, kind of during the pandemic, and then it moves into the post-pandemic. We see this converging at an airport, which is kind of, people are, you know, just as everything is shutting down, whatever. And so there's, everybody's just like, oh, okay. And then everything is gone, like everything's done. And there's a character, I'm pretty sure she's not named. And they're living there at the airport. There's a group of people. And of course, the kind of instigating moment is that there is, just as everything shuts down, there's a plane that lands at the airport, and it has confirmed cases of the pathogen on it. So what both the airport and everybody decides, while the government still exists, is that to protect everybody that currently is at the airport, and as well as the community around it, is that everybody on the plane will remain on the plane. Nobody gets off, and nobody ever does get off the plane. Um, it ends up, they seal it, and all the passengers on board, you can kind of connect the dots. So that moment acts as a catalyst for a character, for a kind of side character that they're there for a period of time, and she ends up, you know we end up being told, um, by the narrator, that one day, because she ran out of her medications, she ran out of her antidepressants, that one day she just gets up and she walks out of the airport, and we are explicitly told she's never seen again. Nobody knows whatever happens to her, and it's kind of assumed that she ends up kind of committing suicide. So there's this very great understanding of character versus self, that there's this walk into the great darkness that you never come back from. And of course, granted, you know there's a whole bunch of the theories that could go behind that, but uh, Mandel does such a good job at these depictions, of things. And of course, like all good uh, novels and things that are written about post-apocalyptic things, is that there's always a cult, and that's what the symphony runs into. They find this town, they seem nice and whatever, um, and what ends up happening is that uh, this group, they end up wanting to keep the symphony and everything else. So they have to literally try and escape. And of course, that's why we see people get kidnapped, because um, the symphony takes somebody, not by their own knowing, but they take somebody from the community. This person, pretty much, smuggles themselves out, and it becomes a whole fiasco and all this. So there's this conflict with, uh, you could call it society, because at this time we see this inside of this society, you know that is the cult. At that point in the novel, or at that point in the timeline, we see there's not really anybody else. There's the airport, but the airport is there. It's out there, so we don't know about the airport. So we just get this conflict between, what do you do in a situation? We know what's going to happen if we hand this girl over, Obviously, in a best case scenario, she's gonna get the living everything smacked and beat out of her. And, in a worst case scenario, they're just gonna kill her. And of course we can come up with whatever things, there's all kinds of cults come up with all kinds of crazy stuff. So we have this conflict here all around that exists with a character. And Mandel does such a beautiful job at showing us these different kinds, these different conflicts and types of conflicts. Um, for the most part, we keep, the same point of view. And when I say the same point of view, I mean that we do not switch from, first person, to third person, whatever. We don't go from omnipotent to, anything. Everything stays as though we are, we are existing, or we're, being told this story by characters who are surviving, and everything, and we're there with them. So, how does that allow us, I guess, to determine what it looks like? What does it look like to have a character battle? And there's different kinds of battling. We see um, it starts it starts in Canada. That's where a lot of this takes place. I believe that's even where the symphony is. They are in Canada and they move around. So it's this idea about how do we survive, especially before the pandemic. We have all these, pretty much how we survive now. We have all these bills and there's stuff we have to worry about. What about our brother, our mother, these people that are in ordinary life, they're struggling and stuff like that. So we go to help them, and we go to do stuff for our work. And our narrator at the beginning works for a symphony or works for a theater production and stuff like that. So we have this aura around us of you know reflections of now. What do we see now? How do we survive? I think for me, and kind of like side note, there's for me there's interesting things always going on in my life. um, but you can relate. You always relate, um, especially whenever in a situation like that where you know what do you do with your family? And of course, and there's always things that come up, and it does come up in the novel. What do you do when your family dies? What do you do when you lose everything? What do you do? And obviously there are characters that they just stand up in the airport and they walk out. There are others that rise to the occasion. They lead symphonies. They do their grand production. They try their darndest to make it work. They don't always end up leading symphonies. They end up leading cults. You know, and so there's that. But I think that the important thing to remember in life, and that Mandel does such a good depiction, is that sometimes the best thing that we can do is to survive. What does that look like? Sometimes that looks like hoarding magazines. Sometimes, can't remember what Clark would take. I wish I could remember. I mustn't have written it down. That is so annoying. Um, from now on, I'm just going to start making sure that I actually go back and I read um, everything. I mostly just read, like I said, I read mostly just the notes that I took. See, now I can't even find. Anyway, but there are always ways that we find to survive. Now, yes, I assure you, there are people that go off, they leave the airport. And I assure you, there are plenty of people, both in life as well as, local life, me, you, you know, there's community, there's national, whatever, bigger and bigger groups, that lead cults and do whatever. There's also, people that create symphonies, people that are able to make things happen, make things work. And so it's all about finding that middle ground. How do you survive? Um, how do you get somewhere? I don't know. And I think that that's something that is done so well in the novel, and it's absolutely beautiful. Um, and I think that one of the most interesting things um, is truly what happens, and of course, the novel depicts that. There's, so many things going on, and I think on a macro level, character versus self, character versus character, makes the bigger picture seem so difficult, so unable to understand, while at the same time, this novel does such a good job at forcing us also to understand there's character versus society, there's society versus society, there's also character versus nature, there's society versus nature, there's things that are going on. So we have these conflicts, we have both the macro and micro conflicts. This macro conflict of character versus everybody else, or a group versus everybody else. There's also this conflict of character versus character, this micro thing of what am I doing? How am I failing? And I think that Mandel does such a good job. We see Elizabeth battle with this Arthur, who's the gentleman who's living um, in Canada and is in charge of this doing this theater production. We see him, try to survive, pre-pandemic. And we see this wraparound of how do you survive? How do you make things happen? And then we see life fall apart for these characters. And obviously, there are characters that die that they couldn't help it. So, and we see Arthur, you know, do his best. Arthur, who's in town, I believe he's in Ontario, and he does his best. He kind of boards himself up and everything else, you know, waiting, eating the food that he has and everything else, trying to take care of his brother, but who's in a wheelchair, and in the end, um, his brother dies. And that's also outside of what you can control. Arthur couldn't control that. His brother, things happened. And as far as I know, I believe it was his illness that caused his death. So he's battling with this. He's grappling with, okay, what do I do? And Arthur has to come to conclusion, it's been enough time. I should be able to go out. And, when he goes out, there's nobody there. So there's this conflict that exists. And, what do you do when there's nobody around? What do you do when everything that you thought worked doesn't? It's all gone. And it's such a beautiful depiction of how everything works. So that's my ramble a little bit about, character, versus everybody in Mandel's novel. What do I take from it? I'm going to try and just take 5 minutes for this. The biggest takeaway that I did, when I read it and reviewed my notes, reviewed some of the stuff that I wrote down, is that no matter what, life goes on. Now, that takes so many different forms, and coming from somebody that about a week ago, pretty much actually a week to the day, went to a funeral, whatever, life always goes on. Does that mean it gets easier? No. And this novel depicts that. It depicts it so wonderfully. You know, it's something that, Elizabeth battles with constantly. We see the other characters that survive, and I am trying to keep it a little crude, or a little, about who survives, who doesn't, you know, just because I don't want to reveal too much. There's at the end, there's a major thing that happens, and it's just like, oh, thank you, God. There's lays a little light, possibly, but at the same time, there's no guarantees. And so, what does that look like? That looks like, a group of characters that are pretty much just doing their job. They're existing. They're going on. So what do we have to do as people? As characters, we always move on. We always find a way. Does that mean that things are going to be great? No, far from it. So in hardships and death and everything, Lord willing, hopefully, we never have to experience something where literally you can watch an entire city's population go from several thousand, several million. I don't know the population of Ontario. Um, go from that go from that big to suddenly you can be a single person walking alone in the snow in Ontario, and you don't see any other footprints. You don't see anybody else. So what does that look like? What does it look like whenever you find yourself in a community that you don't like, and it's a community that is not what you thought it once was? How do you survive? What do you do when you do find a community that you like and is helping you and boosting you? I think that that's what Elizabeth most definitely represents, is a person that finds a community that helps them. Now, it is, said that there are people that come and go throughout the symphony, as they travel and everything. So, and yes, so you can come and go. You are never restricted. So, where does that leave me as a reader with this? I think it is a very good book. It's a fairly quick read. Now, granted, it is like 300 and something pages. So, um, but I think if you would have like 2-3 hours, like, or if you're, I don't recommend trying to read this as you sleep, um, or as you're trying to relax and sleep, but it's a very good novel that you have a little bit of time, and it's very much the same as the Eat, Pray, Love, which is sitting right here. So, that, there's chapters. The chapters aren't very long. Some chapters are literally like a paragraph, 2 paragraphs long. Others are like 3-5 pages. So, um, definitely something easy to read, and I highly recommend it. I think it's a very good depiction of what you as a reader want to see when it comes to a character versus whatever conflict. If you're a writer, it's another good way to, see how different conflicts play out and what you want your character to do. You know, do characters die? Yeah. How do you have good control over that? And how do you even more wrap that up in a way that your reader is going to be surprised, they're going to be, or it's going to have effect. Nobody likes a movie, a novel, whatever, where a character just bleh, they just die, and it's just like, oh, okay, whatever. You know, you want a death to have reason, and if you're gonna kill 95% or 99.5% of the world's population, you better have a good reason. So that's my rant. I tried to keep, this video less than an hour long. So, but I hope you guys have a good rest of your day and have a wonderful year. So, until next time, may you guys be filled with peace, love, and joy.